begin? Well, at the beginning, the Valar, who are spirits created by the One, or Eru, Ilúvatar, come into the world from the void beyond and form the world with their powers. When their labors are finished, there's no time to rest because they immediately go to war with Melkor, who was once one of them, but now has decided that he wants to rule all that they have created. The Valar are victorious and Melkor retreats. So the Valar decide to create a home for themselves in the center of their new world. In the center of the world is a great lake, and in the center of that lake is an island. This is where the Valar choose to be their home. They name it El Marin, and it is lit by two great lamps, one to the north and one to the south. This home, however, is destroyed when Melkor brings down the lamps, breaking apart the land around them. So the Valar set about creating a new, safer home in a land to the furthest west, the continent of Aman. In Aman, the Valar raise up a great mountain range to protect themselves, and within the continent they build themselves a beautiful city, Valamar. Then, with their new home ready, Yavanna, the lady of all that grows, sat upon a hill and began to sing. Yavanna's song and power was combined with the tears of Nienna, the Vala of pity, who sat with her. From this power came the two trees of Valinor, Telperion and Lorelin. Telperion was the silver tree, and its flowers dripped silver dew, while Lorelin had flowers of flame and rained shimmering gold. These trees lit Valinor with constant light that brightened and dimmed in cycles. Thus began the years of the trees. Now, to understand the years of the trees, we need to understand just how long 1 year is. There is a whole lot of writing and discourse around Valian years, but from what I understand, and thank you so much to Tolkien Gateway for helping summarize things and helping me start my research, 1 Valian day is 12 hours. In this time, both of the trees will fully wax and then wane. 1 Valian year is 1,000 Valian days, and 1 age of the Valar is 100 Valian years. For context, 1 Valian hour equals 7 solar hours, so hours of the sun. The sun at this point does not yet exist, but it will. So for context, 1 Valian year equals about 9.5 solar years. There is a whole lot more surrounding this, but for the sake of simplicity and my own sanity, just remember that 1 Valian year, which is how we measure the years of the trees, is almost 10 times longer than 1 year of the sun. Okay, back to the Valar. Within their realm, under the light of the trees, the Valar go about their lives in peace, not paying much mind to the fact that Melkor is now lording over Middle-earth. The Valar know that at some point, the children of Ilúvatar are going to appear in Middle-earth, these children being first the elves and then the men. This was the whole reason the world had been created. And despite knowing this, over the course of 1,000 years, the Valar did nothing as Melkor filled the land with darkness and terrible creatures, enjoying his dominion over the continent. The only Valar to travel to Middle-earth in this time were Yavanna and Arome. Yavanna had put the plants and creatures of Middle-earth into a sleep-like state when the Valar left for Aman. She was hoping to protect as much as she could from Melkor, and so she would go back from time to time and check on things. Arome, as a great hunter, would ride his horse Nahar throughout Middle-earth, killing monsters and dark creatures as he went, doing a small part to combat the evil of Melkor. Now, sometime in the 1,000 years after the creation of the trees, Aule, the Vala of crafting, became impatient for the awakening of the children of Ilúvatar. He had a great desire to share his skill and knowledge, to teach and nurture the minds of others. When this impatience got the better of him, in secret, he crafted the first dwarves out of stone, using impressions from the song of creation for their shape. He knew the world was dangerous, so he created them to be strong and able to endure hardship. As soon as he was finished, the dwarves arose, but they weren't truly living creatures. They were more like puppets, only moving around when Aule wanted. And at the moment of their creation, Iluvatar appeared to Aule, furious that he had attempted to create life, something only Iluvatar himself could do. But Aule explained that he wasn't trying to play God. He wasn't trying to be Iluvatar. He just wanted so badly to love and teach new creatures. So, in recompense, Aule raised his hammer to destroy the dwarves. But in that moment, Iluvatar gave the dwarves souls, truly bringing them to life. Aule was overjoyed, but Iluvatar told him that he would not allow these beings of his adoption to be awake in the world before the beings of his choice. And that quote has always bothered me. Anyway, he told Aule he would put the dwarves to sleep and place them in mountains. There they would wait for the awakening of the elves. After this, Aule told his wife, Yavanna, what had happened, and she was not pleased that he had done this in secret. She decreed that his creations would forever be at odds with her creations, all things that grow. After 1,000 years had passed since the creation of the trees, Yavanna finally petitioned the Valar on behalf of Middle-earth, arguing that they needed to do something to combat Melkor, because the firstborn children were going to awaken, and the world was now filled with horrors. At this council, Mondos tells the Valar that the elves were going to awaken soon, and that they would awaken to starlight. With this knowledge, Varda, Lady of the Stars, began her greatest labors. She kindled new, bright stars and placed them above the world, forming them into constellations. This task took her 50 years, and when she was finished, the first elves awoke beside the bay of Cuivianen on the eastern shore of the inland sea of Helkar. The first elves named themselves the Quendi, meaning those who speak with voices, and set about exploring their environment. Melian, one of the Maya, who had helped tend the gardens of Lorien, decided she wanted to truly see and enjoy the starlight, so she crossed into Middle-earth. It was impossible to see the stars in Valinor because the light of the trees was so bright it blocked them out, kind of like magic light pollution. At the awakening of the elves, the fathers of the dwarves also awoke in their mountains. For years the elves live in peace, until finally Melkor discovered they were there. He sent spirits to strike terror into them and abduct those who went out alone. Specifically, Melkor sent out dark riders to create a deep fear in the elves of anyone on horseback. Also at this time, Khazad-dûm is founded by Durin the Deathless. One day, as Orome rode about the world, killing dark creatures as he did, his horse alerted to something in the distance. Going off in search, Orome quite literally stumbled upon the first elves. As Melkor intended, many of them ran from Orome in terror. Only the bravest stayed long enough to find out that Orome was different from the evil creatures of Melkor. After spending some time with them, Orome took word to the Valar that the elves had awoken, and finally they decided it was time to deal with Melkor. The Valar went to war, starting with Melkor's fortress in the west, Angband. He had specifically placed that there in preparation for an attack from the Valar. But the Valar still overcame it quickly, and Melkor's forces retreated to his stronghold of Autumno. The Valar put a guard over the elves at Cuivianen, then went to attack Autumno. There were 2 years of brutal fighting. Then Melkor retreated within his fortress, and the siege of Autumno began. This conflict was called the Battle of Powers, and ended when the Valar tore the roof from the fortress. Melkor tried to hide deep in the caverns, but Tulkas dove in and wrestled him out. Melkor was chained, then brought to Valinor to stand trial. He was sentenced to 3 ages of imprisonment in the halls of Mondos, somewhere no one, no matter how powerful, could escape. Remember, an age is 100 years, so Melkor was sentenced to 300 years of imprisonment. The Valar then decide that the world is still a dangerous place, so they call for the elves to join them in Valinor. But given their history with powerful creatures and their fear at just how vicious the Battle of the Powers had been, the elves are wary and untrusting. So 3 emissaries are chosen to travel to Valinor, and there they see the splendor of the trees and the majesty of the Valar. These emissaries return to the elves and convince most of them that they should undertake the long and difficult journey to Valinor. The elves that chose to stay in Middle-earth and not undertake the journey became the Ivari, the unwilling, and are considered to be Moriquendi, elves of darkness. Those who chose to leave Middle-earth and travel to Valinor are the Calaquendi, elves of light. The Calaquendi split into 3 groups, each one led by one of the 3 emissaries. Ingwe led the Vanyar, the first group, which is the smallest. The middle group were the Noldor, led by Finwë. And finally, in the back, Elwë led the Teleri, the largest group. The journey is exceptionally difficult. There are no paths, and they have to cross the entire continent. When the group pauses at the river Anduin, the Teleri get left behind and become afraid to cross the mountain range. A group at this time break away from them and travel downriver. This group become known as the Nandor. Now the Vanyar and Noldor make it all the way to the western shore of Middle-earth, but stop at the sea and are afraid by the massive expanse of water. So Arome leaves them to go back to the Valar and find a solution, while the elves retreat to the forests of West Beleriand and wait. Finally, the Teleri, spurred on by their king, make it over the mountains and into East Beleriand. During this time, their king, Elwë, spends a lot of time in the forest. He's searching for his friend, the king of the Noldor, Finwë. And on one of these journeys, Elwë goes deep into the forests of Nan Elmoth, where he became mesmerized by the sound of singing. Transfixed, he follows the sound and finds Melian, the Maiar who had come to Middle-earth years ago. Elwë reached out, and once they touched hands, a spell fell over them, holding them both in place. Elwë's people searched for him, but no matter what they did, they could not find him. The Valar send Ulmo to bring the elves across the sea. He helps ease their fear of the water, and the Vanyar and Noldor agree to get onto an island, which Ulmo uses as a ferry of sorts to bring the elves across the Sea of Belagir to Aman. The Teleri, who were further to the east, did not hear Ulmo's call until it was too late. Some of the Teleri stayed behind in the east, refusing to give up the search for Elwë, but the rest moved to the coast. Olwë, Elwë's brother, becomes their new king. The Teleri on the coast are befriended by the Maiar Ose and Uinen and come to love the sea. The sound of rushing water becomes a part of their songs, and the Teleri become the best singers of all the elves. In Valinor, the Vanyar and the Noldor soon miss the starlight, and so the Valar open a gap in the Pelori Mountains to allow the elves to see out into the sea and up at the stars. This gap is called the Calaquiria, the pass of light, because the light of the trees would spill through and out into the sea. In the gap, a hill is raised up, and at the top, the Vanyar and the Noldor build their city. This city is named Tirion, and it rests upon the hill Tuna. The Vanyar become close to Manwë and Varda, sharing their love of poetry and song. The Noldor are inquisitive and love to learn, so they become close to Aule, who again loves to share his knowledge. The Vanyar eventually leave Tirion to live on the hills of Taniquetil, the highest mountain of the Pelori, on top of which Manwë and Varda live. Yavanna gifts Galathilion, which is a small version of the silver tree Telperion, to the Noldor. It sits in the center of their city, beside the king's manor. Finally, after years, the begging of Finwë, who misses the Teleri dearly, and at the urging of the Valar, Ulmo returns to bring the Teleri to Aman. Ose, unwilling to lose his friends and his new beautiful singers, convinces some of the Teleri to stay. This group becomes the Falathrim, elves of the Falas, which means coast. The group of Teleri that are still looking for Elwë also refuse to leave, and they become the Eglath, the Forsaken. On the journey across the sea, Ose follows the island. When it's near Aman, he calls out, and the Teleri beg Ulmo to stop. And so Ulmo routes the island just off the coast of Aman, and it becomes Tol Eresi, the Lonely Isle. Finwë, High King of the Noldor, marries Miriel, a very talented weaver. Back in Middle-earth, Elwë and Melian awaken from the trance. Melian has shared her power with Elwë, granting him more power, strength, and causing him to become even more beautiful. So when he comes out of the woods, he appears more like a Maiar than an elf. The Eglath are amazed and name him Elu Thingol, King Greymantle. He marries Melian, and they become king and queen of the remaining elves in the west of Middle-earth. These elves are now called the Sindar. The dwarves, who had begun creating cities within their mountains, finally make it into the west, founding the cities of Nogrod and Belagost. Time passes, and the Teleri decide that they want to go to the mainland. They can see the light of the trees through the Calakiria, which just reaches the edge of their island. The Valar have Ulmo command Ose to teach the Teleri how to build ships, which he does reluctantly. When the first ships are built, Ose gifts the Teleri with a flock of swans, which pull the ships across the water to Aman. The Teleri explore the coastline, then visit the Noldor, who give them gems and eventually help them build a city on the coast, which they name Alqualande. Years pass in peace as the Noldor live in Tirion, the Teleri live in Alqualande, and the Vanyar live on the slopes of Taniquetil, while back in Middle-earth, the Sindar live in the forests of Beleriand. In Tirion, Finwë and his wife Miriel prepare to have a child. The pregnancy is very difficult on Miriel, and by the time she gives birth, much of her spirit has gone into the child. She tells Finwë that she is weary and will have no more children. He is saddened and goes to Manwë for help to heal her. Miriel is taken to the gardens of Lorien, where the maids of Este, Lady of Healing, tend to her. However, instead of healing, Miriel's weary soul leaves her body and travels to the halls of Mondos. Elf spirits are separate from their body, and if their body is killed or life becomes too unbearable, their spirit will leave. But it is still bound to the world and cannot escape it in the same way mortal spirits can, so they have somewhere they need to go, and this becomes the halls of Mondos. Finwë mourns, raising his son and waiting for Miriel to return to her body, but she did not. Eventually, he went to Manwë and asked what could be done. He wanted more children, he wanted happiness, and he missed Miriel terribly. After much thought, Manwë announces the statute of Miriel and Finwë. The statute says that if one spouse from a couple of elves dies, they will have the choice as to whether or not they wish to be reborn. If they do wish to be reborn, the remaining spouse must wait. However, if they do not wish to be reborn, they have 12 years after their decision, after which time they will be bound within the halls of Mondos and cannot change their mind, meaning that the living spouse may now take a new spouse. Finwë waits and does truly hope that Miriel will change her mind, but in time, he stops visiting her body in the gardens. Upon the invitation of Ingwë, king of the Vanyar, Finwë goes to visit upon the slopes of Taniquetil. There he sees Indis, sister of Ingwë, and she begins to bring him great joy. In time, they are married. At some point in his early adulthood, Finwë's son, Feanor, marries Nurdanel, a sculptor, and together they have 7 sons, which is pretty much unheard of for the elves. It takes the spirit and vitality of both parents to create a child, and it is only by the great power of his spirit that he is able to assist in fathering 7 children. Fingolfin, the eldest of the children of Feanor and Indis, is born. In Middle-earth, Melian and Thingol have their child, Luthien. Her birth is a great cause for celebration, and upon it the first flowers of Middle-earth bloom. Finarfin, second son of Finwë and Indis, is born. The dwarves finally venture into Beleriand and come across the elves. Both races are as amazed as they are confused by one another. The dwarves take the initiative to learn Sindarin because the elves think too highly of themselves to learn Khazad, and trade begins between the races. At some point during this time, after becoming full-grown, Fingolfin marries Inare, and in 1260, their first son, Fingon, is born. Finarfin marries Irwen, daughter of the king of the Teleri. Both Turgon, the second son of Fingolfin, and Finrod, eldest son of Finarfin, are born. Back in Middle-earth, Melian senses that there is going to be trouble, and that the elves will need a strong, safe, kingly home. And so Thingol commissions the dwarves to work with his elves, and together they build Menegroth, the mansions of the king, the 1,000 caves, the greatest of the dwellings of any elf in Middle-earth. The dwarves bring word to Thingol that strange, dark creatures are appearing throughout the east and attacking the Avari. The dwarves begin creating weapons for the Sindar. Around this time, the Nandor have finally made it around the Misty Mountains and roamed far and wide, but they have come across orcs and have no defenses against them. So, having heard of King Thingol, the leader of the Nandor, Denethor, travel to Beleriand and join his kingdom, deciding to live in Osiriand. The daughters of Fingolfin and Finarfin are born, Eredhel and Galadriel. Melkor's 3 ages of imprisonment are finally up, and he is brought before the Valar again for judgment. Melkor manages to convince Manwë that he has truly changed and repented. Manwë could not understand the evil in Melkor's heart, so he didn't see the threat. Tulkas and Ulmo did not trust Melkor, but they did not go against Manwë either. Melkor hated the elves. He blamed them for his downfall in Middle-earth and wanted vengeance. So he began a long plan and set about befriending the elves. Before long, on good behavior, he had permission to move around Valinor as he pleased. He quickly identified the Noldor as the best group to ingratiate himself into. They loved knowledge and creation so much, and he could offer information and mentorship and gain their trust. Feanor creates the Silmarils, the greatest of any labor of the elves of the world. They were gems that held the true brilliance of the light of the trees. No one knows how he did it, but everyone saw how spectacular the creation was. Varda hallowed the jewels, and Feanor kept them close. In time, he became proud and possessive, only allowing his own family to even look at them. Melkor also saw the majesty of the Silmarils and lusted after them. He envied and hated Feanor. Now, more determined than ever, Melkor focused on manipulating the Noldor. He spread lies and deceit through their city, feeding into their pride and stoking their arrogance. In particular, he sowed dissent within the royal family, making Feanor believe that his half-brothers were trying to take over, while Fingolfin and Finarfin began to hear rumors that Feanor planned to drive them out of their city. At the same time, Melkor was planting the idea that elves were being held captive by the Valar, saying the Valar did not want the elves to be in Middle-earth because it was the elves' birthright to be the rulers of Middle-earth. The Valar wanted to keep control for themselves, and they planned to supplant the elves with men who were weak and mortal. Idril, daughter of Turgon, is born. Eventually, tensions hit fever pitch, and Feanor is brazenly speaking out against the Valar in the streets of Tirion. Alarmed by this, Finwë calls a council of his lords. and the first to arrive is Fingolfin, who demands to know what will be done about his brother. Unfortunately, Feanor was hot on his heels, and seeing Fingolfin speak against him to their father, an argument erupted that ended in Feanor threatening Fingolfin's life in front of the entire city. The Valar call everyone involved in the threat to face judgment, and it is discovered that Melkor is behind this dissonance. However, Feanor is still held responsible for his actions and is exiled from the city of Tirion for 12 years. His 7 sons and his father go with him, leaving Fingolfin as acting king of the Noldor in the city of Tirion. Melkor knew that he had been found out, and he ran. He turned up at Feanor's new fortress, but Feanor saw him for what he truly was, and insulted Melkor, and turned him away. Melkor then went south, evading both Tulkas and Orome, and sought out Ungoliant, a monstrous spider that wove webs of pure darkness. Together, they began plotting his revenge on Valinor. During the annual festival of the first fruit, Manwë decided that he wanted to heal as best he could the damage that Melkor had inflicted upon Valinor. So he summoned Feanor and invited all of the elves to his home atop Taniquetil. From exile, only Feanor comes. His father and sons remain behind. At this festival, Fingolfin forgives Feanor and announces that no issues will separate their family, to which Feanor agrees. However, at the same time, during the festival, while most of the people of Valinor were up in Manwë's home, Melkor and Ungoliant sneak in and go straight for the trees. Melkor wounds the trees deeply, and Ungoliant poisons them, then sucks them dry of sap. All of Valinor is plunged into darkness, and chaos ensues. While fleeing the continent, Melkor stops at Feanor's home in exile. There, he slays Finwë, Feanor's father, High King of the Noldor, and steals the Silmarils. Once the chaos settles, everyone meets at the dead trees, except the Teleri, who have remained all this time within their city of Alqualande. At the trees, Yavanna asks Feanor for the Silmarils. She believes that with them she can bring the trees back to life, but he refuses. But they soon learn that it doesn't matter, because Melkor has taken them, and Finwë has been murdered. Feanor then rushes home to see his father's body. With no hope, the Noldor return to their dark city. Soon Feanor appears, breaking his exile, and begins to whip his people into a frenzy. Using his great power of speech, he speaks against the Valar, blaming them for the death of his father and the actions of Melkor in general. He names Melkor Morgoth, the black foe of the world. Then he swears a terrible oath to never stop pursuing the Silmarils, doing whatever it takes to get them back. His sons jump up and swear this oath as well. Despite the reluctance of Fingolfin and Finarfin, who try to stop their people from listening to Feanor, the Noldor end up agreeing as a majority to leave their city, choosing to follow Feanor into Middle-earth. The Noldor march to Alqualande, ignoring the messenger from Manwë who warns them not to do this. In Alqualande, Feanor asks to borrow the magnificent swan ships of the Teleri, intending to sail them to Middle-earth. But the Teleri refuse. This ends in the first kinslaying, where the Noldor slaughter the Teleri and steal the ships. Despite the fury of Ossë and Uinen, the Valar refuse to let any of the Maiar or Valar become involved. While marching north, a messenger appears to the Noldor and delivers the prophecy of the North, otherwise known as the Doom of the Noldor. This message tells the elves that the House of Feanor is banished. Their terrible oath and actions at the kinslaying cannot be forgiven. Anything they do will end in evil, and they will forever be without land or belonging. Any of the Noldor who choose to follow Feanor will be following him into exile, and they will be completely cut off from the Valar. They will suffer greatly, and any who do not die in Middle-earth will fade away. Because of this, already heartsick at the killing of his wife's people, Finarfin and some of the other Noldor turn back. They are forgiven by the Valar, but his children, along with the rest of the Noldor, continue to follow Feanor. In Middle-earth, around this same time, Ungoliant is demanding payment from Morgoth for her help in killing the trees. She ends up demanding the Silmarils, which he of course refuses, and she very nearly kills him. Morgoth screams, "Awaken the Balrogs hiding within Angband," and they come to his rescue. Back in charge, Morgoth rebuilds Angband, making it his new stronghold in Middle-earth. Immediately, with his forces gathered, Morgoth launches an attack. The forces of Morgoth attack Beleriand, surrounding the kingdom of Thingol and Melian, cutting them off from the Falathrim in the west and the Nandor in the east. Thingol sends word to the Nandor to come out and fight, and the first battle in the Wars of Beleriand begins. The Nandor suffer heavy losses, including their ruler, Denethor, and his family. Thingol does prevail, and the orcs in the east are slaughtered, but many of the Nandor are scarred from this battle. They withdraw into the forests and become the Lequendi, the Green Elves, and refuse to take part in any of the wars to come. Some of the Nandor return with Thingol to his home in Menegroth. There, Thingol learns that the orcs have overrun the west of his kingdom, and the Falathrim have retreated behind their walled cities on the coast. So, Thingol calls his people to retreat into the forests around Menegroth, and Melian steps up. Using her power as a Maiar, Melian creates a wall of enchantment around their forest, protecting their realm. This becomes known as the Girdle of Melian, and no one can cross it without Thingol and Melian knowing. Their realm becomes known as Doriath, the Hidden Realm. Back to the Noldor. The prophecy of the North is already at work. The Noldor begin to mistrust one another, and many start to turn their fear and their anger and frustration against Feanor. Seeing this, Feanor and his sons and some of their loyal followers steal away in the night, taking the swan ships and abandoning Fingolfin and Finarfin's family. Feanor's people land in Losgard to the north, and Feanor has the ships burned. The glow of the fire is seen by the Noldor back in Aman, and they know they are betrayed. Feanor's people march into Hithlum and stop at the lake Mithrim, but before they can make camp, they are attacked by Morgoth's forces. He heard and saw them coming, and wanted to catch them unprepared. Thus began Dagar Nuin Gileath, the battle under stars. This battle is renowned because despite being unprepared and outnumbered, Feanor's forces were victorious. But despite this victory, Feanor did not stop while he was ahead. He rushed out ahead of his forces towards the very gates of Angband, thinking he was going to fight Morgoth himself. That doesn't happen. Instead, when Feanor reached Dor-Daedaloth, the Balrogs emerged. Feanor is surrounded, without support, and despite a great battle, he is mortally wounded by Gothmog, lord of the Balrogs. Feanor's sons reach him before his death, and the Balrogs retreat. But before his sons can get him back to their camp, Feanor tells them to put him down. He tells them that they must remember their oath and avenge him. Then, Feanor, greatest of all elves to ever live, dies. Back at Mithrim, the sons of Feanor are met by messengers of Morgoth, who tells them that he wants to surrender and is even willing to give up a Silmaril. The sons don't believe this, of course, but Maedhros, the eldest, convinces them to let him go with the intention of springing a trap. Morgoth, however, has the exact same plan, and he sent more men. Maedhros is captured, but when his brothers refuse to leave at Morgoth's demand, Maedhros is hung by the wrist from the top of Thingorudrim, the mountains behind Angband. The remaining Noldor Those left behind in Aman, now being led by Fingolfin and Finrod, Finarfin's eldest son, have decided that come hell or high water, they are getting to Middle-earth. This meant they had no choice but to cross the Hel Caraxes, known as the Grinding Ice, an exceptionally dangerous path through the icy wastes of the furthest north. This is considered one of the greatest feats of the Noldor. Their determination and suffering was unmatched, and it was only because of their youth and the strength of their spirits, fresh from Aman, that any of them survived. That being said, many, including the wife of Turgon, mother of Idril, were lost. In Valinor, during the time of the rebellion of the Noldor and the crossing of the Hel Caraxes, the Valar had sat quietly, thinking among themselves. They wanted to create new lights for the world that would help the elves and men survive in Middle-earth, but would also hinder Morgoth and be strong enough that he could not destroy them like he had the lamps and the trees. From the last bits of life of their two trees, the Valar create the sun and moon, which are given to two Maiar to carry them across the sky, creating night and day. As Fingolfin leads the Noldor out of the Hel Caraxes, taking their first steps upon Middle-earth, the moon rises for the first time behind them. And with the first rising of the moon, followed by the first rising of the sun, the years of the trees comes to an end. Thus begins the first age of Middle-earth during the years of the sun.